asking. That is a no. Negatory. No close-ups. No close-ups. Unless you can make me look 20 years younger and 30 pounds thinner, that's a no. We have some brave souls in the front row. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. My name is Tawny Nelson. I am the Director of Small Business for Wells Fargo Bank for Oregon and Southwest Washington. It's a privilege to be here this morning together. Since 1852, Wells Fargo has helped customers financially in the Portland area be successful. We're hosting today's event as part of that effort. It's my honor to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Bill Conerly of Portland, who is a veteran economist, author, lecturer, and newsmaker, and well-known and beloved by many. He has been interviewed on national and local television and radio stations across the country. He is an online contributor to Forbes magazine and has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Fortune magazine, and USA Today. So it is my pleasure to welcome Bill to the stage. Good morning, Bill.
Thank you. The economic outlook. What filter will you use as you listen to a presentation on the economic outlook? Because we all listen to people with a filter. We're looking for certain things. Some of you maybe came in thinking, oh, I hope he will confirm my political beliefs. He'll say Trump good or Trump bad and I'll feel better. No, not going to do that at all. And others are thinking, gee, I hope I get some insight into investments. Like I've got Amazon stock in my IRA. Should I sell it? No, not going to help you. But if you've got Amazon stock in your IRA, you don't need help from me. Instead, I want to challenge you to think about business, and I'm going to say business, but also organizations like nonprofits, governments, any enterprise that has revenue and expenses. What does this mean for that organization? And let me give you an example. A fellow asked my help. He was CEO of a mid-sized company, an old company. He had been in charge for 20 years or so and had led the company through some difficult times, but now he was in trouble. 2 years of red ink in his business, and the bank that he was working with was getting nervous, thinking about pulling his loans. He said to me, Bill, the economy has been really hard on my sales, and my costs are rising faster than my competitors' costs, and I'm worried about the bank. What do I do? As part of my preparation for this meeting, I had looked at the economics of his industry, and I had looked at the regional economics for the territories he served, and I had to give him some surprising news. I said, okay, the economy has done this to your sales, but your sales are down by that. You got it? This is what the economy's done to you. This is how much your sales are down. You've got a sales problem that is not caused by the economy. He thought that was bad news. He was, not happy, but I said, hey, this is good news. And he's like, wait a second. I've got a sales problem and this is good news? I said, when you thought it was an economic problem, that was bad news because you can't fix the economy. But if you've got a sales problem, you can fix a sales problem. And he said, I kind of knew that, and I have engaged a consultant to work with my sales manager and my sales reps. And I said, that's great. And oh, by the way, what do you think, what does the sales consultant think that you as the CEO should be doing on the sales effort? And I saw some really awkward body language. He wanted to, delegate that. But to his credit, the next day he called the sales consultant and she said, you need to be going out on sales calls with your people. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Back in that meeting, after talking about sales, we talked about costs. And once again, I had looked at the economic data on the kinds of materials and services and labor that he used, and I didn't understand why his costs would be rising faster than anybody else's costs. So we started probing his cost accounting system. And finally, I just had to say, hey, your cost accounting system is all messed up. Messed up is not the exact verb I used with him, but I'm trying to be polite here. Now, I know enough about cost accounting to diagnose a messed up system, but I don't know enough to unmess a messed up system. So I said, you need a cost accounting expert. And after our meeting was done, he engaged somebody. I did a couple of follow-up phone calls, but mostly left it to him. 8 months later, I was passing through the city where his company is located and stopped in for a cup of coffee, and he had a grin. I've never seen a grin quite that wide. He was so happy. He said, Bill, I started going out on sales calls, and I found that people wanted to do business with us, but our quotes were 20% higher than our competition's. And that shook me up. And then our cost accounting expert revamps our system and says you can cut your bids 20% and still be profitable on the business that came in. So that combination led to increased sales. And he says, I have sold all of our capacity from now through the end of the year next year. And if we get another order, I'm calling up one of the people I laid off last year and asking them to come back. So the economic filter, the business filter on economics can help your organization better understand what's going on with your revenues, what's going on with your expenses. So with that filter in place, let's talk about what I'm going to be doing today. The plan of action here. All right. I'm having a little trouble. If we can advance that at some point. The plan of action here, oh, there we go, is to talk about what's going on globally and nationally. Then I'm going to talk about what's going on in Oregon. And I know that some of you are watching this outside of Oregon. So the Oregon material actually will give you a framework for thinking about any region. It's the same framework that I use when I go around the country talking to other folks. And then we're going to do a little discussion of managing with uncertainty, which is subtitled, How Do You Run an Organization If You Don't Trust the Economist's Forecast? There'll be time for questions. You might want to take some notes. And then I'm going to close with an important message about a lunch I went to some time back. And we're going to have a door prize raffle of a blazer bag, so hang around. This is a picture of global economic growth. The columns in the chart show the year-to-year percent changes in global GDP. And to tell you the truth, I find this a boring chart. Nothing is happening. These fluctuations are so small that the average person on the planet cannot tell the difference. Europe is doing a little bit better. China seems to have stabilized after some deceleration, though we don't trust Chinese statistics. The improvement in Europe is offset by a little weakness in the commodity exporting countries in Africa and Latin America. But you blur your eyes from the details, and the global economy is about the same. So let's talk about what's going on in the U.S. economy. And I first want to begin with where we have been. The percentage change in U.S. GDP from quarter to quarter averages about 3% over time. We are mostly below average. The U.S. economy, it looks like my old report card from 5th grade, where Mrs. Anderson wrote in, Bill does not work up to his potential. Yeah, right, it's true. Well, it wasn't just 5th grade, it was 8th grade and 11th grade and college and graduate school. But the U.S. economy, like your friend Bill Conerly, is not working up to its potential. So we're going in with a light performance. And incidentally, if you're interested in a copy of these slides, I'd be happy to share that with you by email. So what's going on here, I think, is interrelated to uncertainties about the new president. And without going into a Trump good or Trump bad, I want to talk about these areas of policy change and what they may mean for the economy and what they may mean for the business that you're working with. So foreign trade, big issue in the campaign, and it potentially affects many, many businesses. We import products, and if you go to a Walmart or a Fred Meyer, you see a lot of imported products. A lot of retailers are tied to international trade, wholesalers, manufacturers, and many American manufacturers are using imported components here and there. Our farmers do a lot of exporting, and one of the things we economists worry about is there's historic precedent for one country tries to limit imports and then another country retaliates. In 1930, we passed a very high tariff, and in 2 years' time, global trade into and out of the United States fell by half. So we're worried about this. But that's not the only area where there is uncertainty. Immigration, the president has talked a lot about that. The real business worry is what goes on within a company. The U.S. Government does not have the resources to find and deport every person who's not here legally, but they do have the resources to step up audits of businesses. So a lot of companies that are using immigrant workers are wondering what's going on. I don't want to go there. Healthcare. What's going to happen with healthcare? If you're running a medical clinic, if you're running a hospital, if you're running a health insurance company, or if you're a business providing health insurance for your employees, do you know what's going on? I don't know what's going on. So this is an area of great uncertainty. Taxes. There seems to be agreement that we should have tax reform, but not agreement on what structure the tax reform will take. The Republicans in Congress are not agreed among themselves. And of course, anything that they do will be opposed by the Democrats in Congress if it appears to favor rich people. But it's hard to cut personal income taxes without favoring rich people because rich people pay most of the personal income taxes. What's going to happen there? I'm not sure. Probably a little bit of change, but not nearly as much as the politicians are expecting. And finally, regulation. This is one area where we're already seeing some impact. And this is probably the most likely area of economic impact from the Trump administration. The Environmental Protection Agency is already changing its direction. We'll probably get some changes from the Food and Drug Administration. And I think that the result will be more construction projects, more mining projects will be permitted, not immediately. So let me talk about the business implications of all of these. On foreign trade, companies should do the obvious if they're importing, exporting, but one thing that's maybe not so obvious is analyzing supply chains. I recently had the privilege of speaking to a number of people in the fastener industry. Fasteners, nuts, bolts, rivets, that kind of stuff. American factories making American products with American labor mostly use imported fasteners. Who knew? Mostly imported from China or Taiwan. If we get in a trade dispute with China and the inflow of fasteners gets cut back, American manufacturing factories are going to be in trouble. So I would suggest that businesses think about their supply chain. Individuals working for a company involved in international trade may want to think, gee, am I at risk of getting laid off if the trade negotiations go poorly? On immigration, businesses should think, what will happen if I am audited? There was a company up in Washington State, a seafood processor, that lost over a third of its employees in an employment audit. Furniture manufacturer in Tennessee, same thing. Imagine going in to your business one day and a third of the workforce is gone. That is dangerous. The industries most affected are farming and food processing, restaurants, especially the kitchen, hotels and motels with a lot of the maids being immigrants, and the average employer doesn't really know who's legal and who's illegal because everybody brings documentation. We sometimes say undocumented alien. Well, they all have documents if they're working. They all have documents. But what did you do when you were 19 years old on spring break and you wanted to go into a bar? Did you show the bouncer an ID that showed you were 21? Yeah, I'm seeing some heads nod. So the immigrant workers who are here illegally all have documents. They're just bogus documents. And the employer doesn't always know who is bogus and who is not. And companies are starting to worry about what do I do if suddenly some of my workers cannot continue working. And of course, if you're one of those undocumented immigrants, you should think about deportation risk. On health care, I think everybody needs to wait and see, businesses and individuals, for how Congress deals with that issue. On tax change, one of the tax changes I think is fairly likely is a change in the expensing of capital expenditures. Right now, a big capital expenditure is purchased and then for tax purposes depreciated over time. I think there's a chance we'll get expensing of all of that. That would be a shot in the arm to businesses that make capital goods. And Oregon has actually a lot of companies that make capital goods, trucks and railroad cars, airplanes up north. Those are capital goods, and if they get expensed, we could have a shot in the arm there. And for individuals, you may see a summary of how people will fare under the new tax system that Congress is considering it. Don't spend any tax savings until you actually have the cash in your pocket. That is my professional advice, guaranteed to be valuable advice. On deregulation, I think there will be opportunities, especially in things like construction and mining equipment. So with that perspective, let's talk about what's going on in major sectors of the economy. I'm going to skip some of the smaller sectors. Consumers are fairly steady. We've seen a little bit of a decline already in 2017. Consumers cut back on their purchases of new cars and slowed other purchases. But generally speaking, as a broad brush, consumers are living within their means. They're increasing their spending at the same rate as their incomes are going up. Incomes are up from more jobs in the economy and higher wage rates, 2% growth on each of those, and consumers are spending about in line. They're not overstretching on debt, aside from student loans. We can talk about that in question and answer if you're interested. And I'm thinking consumers will do a little bit better next year, but basically it's going to be steady. Housing starts are important traditionally to the Oregon economy. We still have a wood products industry of some significance. This is national data. I'll talk locally in a moment. But nationally, I'm looking for a leveling off. And those of you who have been watching this sector for a long time may remember the days, well, at the peak, 2 million housing starts. Long-run average about 1.5, 1.6 million housing starts. I don't think we're getting anywhere close to that again. One of the things that has not been well reported is U.S. population growth is slower than it used to be, certainly slower than it was 10 years ago. In fact, on a percentage change basis, our population growth is the slowest it's been since 1937. Now, a little bit of that is a decline in the number of births. The women of the millennial generation are being a little slow to have babies, and you know, it's your choice. I'd just add none of you getting any younger. But the big change is foreign immigration. We used to get a flood of people from Mexico. Actually, the flood has turned into a trickle. It is as if, when you just look at the statistics on people coming in, you might think we had already built that wall. And with that slower growth of population, we don't need as many new houses. So this is about as much as we're going to get. And you ought to keep that in the back of your mind as you're thinking about your business and growth potential. Those of you selling to a national audience, population isn't growing as fast as it used to. One of the areas that I think is particularly important in this economic environment is business capital spending. It dropped last year. Part of that was oil drilling activity went down, and that stimulates a lot of capital spending for related materials, pipes and infrastructure, machinery. But the other half was business pessimism. And I talked to business leaders, and I said, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we'll spend money to replace labor if we can save operating expenses, but we're not going to build capacity because we don't think we're going to sell anymore. A lot of doom and gloom. However, now optimism prevails. All the surveys are showing businesses more optimistic, but they're not spending. And I think the limiting factor is that policy uncertainty. So if you are in a business that's affected by international trade, maybe you just wait and see. If you're in a business that uses immigrant workers, maybe you're going to wait and see what audits happen. If you're in healthcare, you certainly don't start a major capital project right now, not knowing what your revenue and costs are going to be next year. So I think that is going to keep capital spending declining this year. Next year, a little bit of rebound, and if we went into 2019, 2020, I think it would be better. So you roll all of these sectors together, and you get weak economic growth. It's not a recession, but it is a continuation of subpar. Remember, par, long-run average at 3%, and I'm looking at like 1.6% this year. So it's a little worse than last year. The average person won't feel the slower growth, but it is certainly nothing to write home about. I am not worried about inflation. I know some of my friends are worried about inflation. I'm like, I don't think too much is going on here. But there are people worried about inflation. Some of them are my crackpot friends who are always worried about inflation. But some of them are not crackpots. They are like on the Federal Reserve Board. And the Fed will be meeting next week, and they'll probably raise interest rates. And people are saying to me, Bill, why is the Fed raising interest rates when inflation, the best way to look at it is that dashed line excluding food and energy, because food and energy sort of goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. But that dashed line is fairly stable, and it's certainly not going up. The Federal Reserve has a vision, a model of how the economy works, and this is important to keep in mind. Under their vision, there is a time lag between cause and effect on monetary policy, what they do with interest rates, between monetary policy and the economy's spending, employment, production, and another time lag between changes in spending, employment, and production and inflation. And in rough terms, it's 12 months for the first time lag, 12 months for the second time lag. So if the Federal Reserve is going to affect inflation, it's about 2 years out. So if Janet Yellen leads her team to raise interest rates next week, it will not be because they're worried about inflation in 2017. It's because they're concerned that inflation will be too high in 2019 if they don't take action today. It's as if you're driving your car down the street and you need to turn the steering wheel 2 blocks before you get to the street you want to turn on. What could go wrong? Of course, that time lag is variable. Sometimes it's 2 blocks, sometimes it's 1.5 blocks, and if you turn too soon, I feel sorry for that little lady walking down the street. So that's a risk to the economy. So let's show the actual interest rate forecast. I'm anticipating a short-term interest rate increase next week, and then not much. With my forecast, and I'm more pessimistic than most other economists, with my forecast of slow growth in 2017, I think after the June increase, not much going on until 2018. The interest rate forecast is not guaranteed, of course, certainly not by Wells Fargo, and let me take this opportunity to thank Wells Fargo for hosting this event. But I'll make a personal guarantee. I'll guarantee that this interest rate forecast is worth every penny you paid to get in here. Easy to say at a free event. So interest rates up. I think long-term mortgage rates will go up, partially because of what the Federal Reserve is doing and partially because of some changes in the global economy. With this economic growth that we're getting, it's not going to be really strong, but it will be growth. Our unemployment rate is likely to stay fairly low. It is historically low now, nationally a little over 4%, locally much less than that. And let's talk about what normal is here. Long run average, about 5.5%. Why should we have 5.5% unemployment? Somebody starts looking for work. Some employer is looking for a worker. It takes a while to find a match. The person looking for work may be just getting out of school, just getting out of the service, or maybe a stay-at-home mom whose kids have hit school and wants to find a job. And the worker is trying to find not just a warm body, but the right fit. It's as if, for those of you not on the job market lately, it's as if they have to swipe right, swipe left to try to find the right match. It doesn't happen right away. And I'm seeing the single people in the audience saying, yeah, it doesn't happen right away. So employees applying for jobs are swiping right or left, employers swiping right or left. This is going to continue. And this is probably the biggest business challenge we have today through the rest of this year and on into next year, is dealing with a tight labor market. It's different from what we were used to a few years ago. One of the economic statistics I monitor is the quit rate. How many people voluntarily quit their jobs? It is way up from what it had been a few years ago. Nobody quits a job in a recession, but they can quit today. So I was at the intersection of Carmen Drive and 72nd in Tigard, driving on Carmen. And in the space from 72nd to going over I-5 is less than a quarter of a mile, and I found 5 help wanted signs only on the right side of the street, because it was going to be hard for me to take a picture of any signs on the left side of the street. So a lot of businesses trying to find workers. Let me give some advice to folks in both the business and employer side as well as the worker side. The first thing that I recommend is a business retention strategy. We often talk about recruitment and retention. I always put retention first. It is easier to keep a good worker than to go out and find a new good worker. So retention plan should begin with compensation. It needs to be in the ballpark. It doesn't have to be high. When I talk to business leaders, they often say, yeah, people leave because they get more pay somewhere else. And that is what the person tells the boss. I'm getting more pay. It is not the reason the person went looking for a new job. Why does a person start looking for a new job? Because the boss is a jerk. It is unhappiness with the first level supervisor that triggers job searches, which often result in a higher pay, and the employees being nice. It's not the employee who's a jerk most of the time. So the employee says, yeah, I'm getting more pay, instead of saying, you are a you-know-what kind of jerk, and take this job and shove it. Training for your first level supervisors is probably the most valuable thing you can do to de-jerkify your managerial rates. It's in your Funkin' Wagnalls. You can look it up. To de-jerkify the management ranks. Now, I'm not the guy to teach this. I don't do supervisory training, but there are people who are really good, and some of your lower level, first level managers are not really jerks. They're nice people if you get to know them, but maybe they've got awkward social skills. Maybe they've just got so many other responsibilities and so many other concerns that they don't give employees the attention needed, whatever, some training can help. So that's on the retention side. Many businesses still need to do recruitment, and I'm going to suggest some non-traditional sources of workers. The traditional sources are, first of all, you tell your existing employees we're hiring, and they mention that to their friends. Or you put in ads. Well, if those traditional sources are working for you, fine. But why am I seeing 5 help wanted signs in less than a quarter of a mile if the traditional sources are working well? For businesses that are having trouble with those traditional sources, non-traditional sources. So as an economist, I say, who has a high unemployment rate? Minorities have a high unemployment rate. Native Americans, immigrants who are fairly new. After they've been here a year, they have a lower than average unemployment rate. But new immigrants, people in rural communities, if you can tap in to this broader community of people who historically have a high unemployment rate, you can get some good people. And I'm also going to say, look at the long-term unemployed. We have a lot of people, mostly men, who are in their late 20s or 30s, and they are spending their days in their parents' basement playing video games. They would have had a job, but they got discouraged in the recession. And they're sort of making do. Now, the typical employer, looking at a resume, sees 6 years without work activity, and the typical employer says, oh, I'm not going to hire that kind of person. Well, if you can be fussy, that's fine. But in today's tight labor market, maybe you can't be so fussy. And some of these people would have been good, solid workers if they had had the opportunity back in the recession. And as for playing video games, I talked to my kids who play video games. They're employed, so it's not an all-day long thing. But in their free time, they play video games. And they'll tell me, I was attacking over here, but then I got attacked over here, and I took some resources to build a factory to make more resources for the future. That's a real business decision, isn't it? Take resources from today, invest in the future. And at the same time, a guy I had an alliance with was saying maybe we ought to change the alliance, and my internal operations were going weird. I had to deal with like 5 things that were all urgent at the same time in a video game. Does that sound like a job? How many of you in the business world have had that? You got 5 urgent priorities. They all need attention. They're all critical. Some of these people playing video games, I think, could be good workers. So give them some consideration. Now, for those of you who are employees, let me give you a suggestion. There is never a better time than today to ask for a raise. All right. The managers here are like, oh, God, I can't believe he's doing that. But never a better time to ask for a raise. And promotion, let me say a few words about asking for a promotion. I have asked for promotions a few times, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I see out in the workplace 2 kinds of people. So imagine a job listing, and it's a promotion for a group of people if they could get the job, and the listing says, here are 5 requirements for this position. There'll be a guy looking at those 5 requirements saying, well, I've got number 1, I've got number 2, I know something about number 3, and how hard can it be to learn number 4 and number 5? So the guy applies for it. And there's somebody else looking at 5 requirements saying, oh, I've got number 1, I've got number 2, I've got number 3, I've got number 4, but number 5, oh, I'm only like 70% of the way to meeting the 5th requirement, so I guess I don't meet the requirement, so I'm not going to apply. It's really sad. But the people who are bold and not afraid of being embarrassed, they apply for the job. And because the people who are a little bit shyer are not applying, they don't apply. And that's how we get jerks in management, is promoting the wrong people. So if you're one of those people who's a little bit timid, a little bit shy, be bold. This is the time to ask for that promotion. So, We've shown a lot of charts. I put out a monthly newsletter. I know some of you receive it. If you'd like to get it, give me a business card at the end or shoot me an email with your email address. Be happy to do that. And you'll have a monthly reminder of this wonderful economic forum and the benefits that you receive from this Wells Fargo hosting this. So now I want to talk about what's going on in Oregon, and again, for those of you watching on video from outside, listen to the framework of how I think about things. So we have had solid economic growth, job growth about 3% on average the last 3 years. My forecast is a little bit less, and you'll see why it is a little bit less in just a moment. But let's just focus on 3% job growth the last few years. Our population growth is accelerating. Oh, we don't have the numbers on here. Sorry about that. But we've had about 1.5% population growth last year. And that was an acceleration, 1.5% population growth. So let's put those two sets of numbers together. 3% job growth, 1.5% population growth. How does that work? Well, at first, if you have more job growth than population growth, you're taking unemployed people and getting them jobs. It's wonderful. But now our unemployment rate in Oregon is below 4% and even lower in the Portland area than the statewide average. We've taken a lot of those people. Can we continue to grow with a big disparity of 3% job growth, 1.5% population growth? That disparity is unsustainable. So how do you resolve it? There are two ways. One is you bring population growth up. And for those folks who are running stores, insurance offices, banks, they'd like to see more population, more customers. For those of you who are already cussing the traffic, maybe you don't want many more people in this area. But in order for us to get enough acceleration of population growth that we can maintain the job growth, we need to bring in more people. And for a person to move here, the person needs a place to live. So we have been building more housing. This is number of housing units permitted. And a housing unit is either an apartment, one single apartment in like a 200-unit complex. We're counting the number of apartment units, number of condo units, and we've been increasing to 19,000, but let me hit you with some arithmetic. In fact, it's not just arithmetic. This is really bad. It's a story problem. We built 19,000 housing units in Oregon last year. We got 63,000 new people. That 1.5% population growth was 63,000 people. And that's 30 housing units for every 100. Our long-run average is 46 housing units for every 100 new residents. That 46 comes because we live a little less than 2.5 people per housing unit, which means it takes about 42, 43 in order to accommodate 100 people, plus you have some tear downs, some vacation homes. So long run average, we grow our housing stock by 46 housing units for every 100 people. We're only building 30. We are underbuilding for the population growth we've got. Can we accelerate our population growth when we're already not building enough housing? Land availability is a big challenge, particularly with our land use rules and urban growth boundary. And then even if we had the land available, when I talk to contractors, they have trouble finding subcontractors, finding carpenters, plumbers, electricians. I think it's unlikely. What will happen is, well, it's already happening. Rental vacancy is low and rents are rising. Houses for sale, the number is low and the prices are going up. Single people are taking roommates to be able to afford the rising rents, and married couples who want to get divorced cannot afford two households. Doesn't that bring a tear to your eye? Two people with a common goal of splitting up, and they don't have the money for two households. Yeah, it's sad. So what's going to happen? Let me go back to this employment forecast. I think we're going to see slower job growth. So those of you serving local people in the business community. There'll still be growth. It's still going to be better than the national average, but it will not be at the breakneck pace we've had the last couple of years. So if you're wondering, how much should I expand my capabilities, how much hiring, how many new offices, maybe you need to go a little bit milder. Population growth, I think, will be a little bit higher, and the housing growth will be as much as we possibly can. So Oregon, still going to grow, but not quite as fast. And that takes us to the last subject, which is managing with uncertainty. I'm going to share, we're a small, intimate group, and I'm going to share with you something I don't tell just anybody. And I see old friends here. So I'm going to tell you this. Sometimes an economic forecast does not turn out to be exactly perfect. All right, I've said it, I've put it on the table. I worked for First Interstate Bank, a predecessor to Wells Fargo, and once told my boss the only issues with my forecast were timing, magnitude, and direction. Other than that, there's nothing to be concerned about. So what do you do if you're not certain? For instance, you could be listening here and saying, okay, an acceleration of growth is coming nationally, Oregon's outperforming, maybe we need to be ready with more capacity, ready for a stronger economy. Or you could be listening to me talk about uncertainty in businesses dragging their feet on major decisions. Maybe it's time to cut your overhead right now. Which is it? Let me give you an athletic metaphor. I really like this woman. What I like about her is she knows where she's going. She knows where she's going. She's in those starting blocks. She never wonders, should I jog left this time? So maybe I ought to circle around behind the bleachers this race. No. She knows where she's going. There's a yellow tape 100 meters away. And my sons, early in their careers, I advise them to use this stance, the sprinter's stance. The boss tells you where to go, and you go there as fast as you can, as well as you can. And young people who are successful at this, they get more responsibility. They get promotions. They become managers themselves. But you know, when you're a manager, there's no yellow tape that's obvious. You have that question. Should we build capacity for a stronger economy, or should we cut overhead now? So I'm going to suggest to you a different athletic metaphor. Visualize a baseball game. And a fast runner has gotten onto first base, and he wants to steal second, but he can't get into the sprinter stance to run to second because he knows there's a chance the pitcher will try to pick him off by throwing the ball to first base, and he'll have to dive back. So his stance is different. It's more parallel, and his hand's closer to the body. I shouldn't demonstrate it. The women in the audience get distracted by my athletic physique. I know. So let me give you a picture of the flexible stance. The key to success in the coming years for businesses as well as governments and nonprofits is ready to go forward, ready to go backwards if you need to. I call this the flexible stance, and I have, in fact, written an entire book on the subject, which coincidentally is named The Flexible Stance. I'm going to give you what I think is the best advice from that book. There's chapter after chapter of how to make your organization more flexible, but the best advice, I think, relates to contingency planning. And this is advice that a family can use as well as a business. So, what is your biggest risk? Think about your biggest risk. I'm using recession, but for some companies it could be a technological change, it could be new competition, it could be a government regulation that is negative, or social attitudes. People could just say, hey, we don't want prunes anymore, and your prune business goes to heck. Think about your biggest risk and then sketch out what you would do. In fact, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Pay attention. You will be graded on this. I am not going to grade your homework assignment. The economy out there is going to grade your homework assignment. So listen carefully. Take a single sheet of paper and go to your favorite coffee shop or bar and identify your risk. In fact, you can do that right now. Think, what's my biggest risk? And then sketch out on one page what you will do if that risk comes to pass. This is not a 3-ring binder exercise. This is a single page exercise. And there are 2 advantages you're going to get by doing that exercise. First of all, you will respond to change faster if you have already outlined the major steps. And having spent some time in the banking world, as I was researching the book, I talked to a number of bankers and I said, what's the difference between a company that survives a sudden shock and those that don't survive? And banker after banker said, the speed of response is critical. So if you have outlined your response ahead of time, you will act faster. The other benefit you'll get is it's a relaxed environment. Business is good for most people now. You sit back and you can make a plan that is consistent with your corporate values and your corporate strategy. If you wait until you're in trouble, oh boy, we can't make payroll, the bank is on my back about our loans and our creditors, they don't want to send any more materials because we're late in paying, and the IRS is wondering about our back taxes, Wall Street expectations not being met. If you get into that sort of panic situation, you'll probably make some bad judgment. I have seen it happen. So do that in advance. You're only halfway through with your homework, though, because every sheet of paper has an interesting feature. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there's a front side and then there's a back side. So refill your coffee or your cocktail, and on the back side, sketch out what is the good thing that could happen. What is, of all the significantly positive things that could happen, what's most likely? And what will you do if the good thing happens? Now, I've talked to a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm ready for more sales, but do you have enough capital, to both working capital and long-term capital? Do you have the people that you would need? Do you have the infrastructure that you would need? Now, I'm not saying that you want to pull the trigger, but sketch out a plan, recognize what your challenges are if you are in high growth mode, and start sketching out that plan so that you can respond faster. So that is probably the most valuable advice. There's other pieces, but it is possible to thrive in a highly uncertain economy. Well, I'm about ready to take some questions, and we're going to have a little business card raffle, I think. What I want to do, let me give you a quick summary, then we'll take questions, and then I've got a short story about a lunch that I'm going to finish with. But as you think about your questions, let me say the big picture is slower growth in the national economy this year and next year, and then the Oregon economy decelerating but still outperforming the nation, and think about the challenges of running an organization in a tight labor market. Thank you very much. All right, anybody have a question? Yes?
It's a 3-part question. You brought it up earlier.
3 parts. I'm not sure I'm smart enough to handle 3.
Well, you brought up the college loan.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, why did it get so high, first of all? When is it going to slow down, the inflation on it? And what does it mean for the future?
So the question is, college loans, why did it get so high? When is it going to slow down? And what does it mean for the future? All right, great question. And I want to thank you for asking the question by giving you a copy of my book.
Thank you.
The federal government encouraged more student loans because they wanted to get more people in college, and the arithmetic seemed to work for a long time. Even if you had to borrow money, college graduates earn more than others. We also had for-profit colleges marketing heavily, and many of the for-profit colleges were getting a majority of their revenue through student loans. And colleges also saw greater demand for their services, more people wanting to college enabled by the student loans. So colleges raised their prices. Tuition went up. And as tuition went up, the number of administrators and the whole cost structure, not so much faculty members, but the non-faculty costs went up. So what we ended up doing was not so much subsidizing students as subsidizing colleges. And is it going to stop? The growth rate is definitely slowing down. So when I look, I'm going to do a human chart here. When I look at all consumer debt, the growth rate percent change from year to year, it's down like this, and non-student loans right there at the tip of my finger, about 4%. I've got a hand problem, but student loans had been up around 15% growth rate, and now they're down to 9%. So they're still growing fast, but not as fast. What's going to happen? I think it will continue to be a political issue, and I'll give you a forecast. This is not a policy recommendation, but a forecast. I think that the next Democrat in the White House will do a major forgiveness of student loans. That's a prediction. What does it mean for the future? You know, it varies. For some people, a student loan is really great. And, you know, the person who's going to get a degree in engineering and needs $10,000 to get through that is going to be fine. The person studying Russian literature and is going to borrow money for 3 years and then drop out, you know, it's probably not a good investment. But I think there's growing awareness that the major is huge, more important than the school you go to, and I think that we'll see college students being better buyers pretty soon. So, another question, yeah.
Well, this is just on that as well. I know, and I don't know the current Secretary of Education, but Arnie Duncan was really putting a lot of focus, or really putting a lot of limitation on subsidizing for-profit, right? And what's the future of that? Do you see that continuing to go? Because I know there had been a lot of marketing, and now there's not.
Right. So the question is, what about the for-profit colleges, and is there going to be a continued push to reduce that? You know, for-profit colleges are a mix, and I hate to paint them all with a broad brush. One study I looked at showed that for-profit colleges compared two-year for-profit compared to community colleges, that the for-profits were doing a better job of getting their people into jobs, because they were all about, this is a career training, and we're bringing in industry experts who know what skills are needed and will get out. Certainly that's been positive in like the health professions. A lot of the for-profits have done well, but I think that some of them have just been sort of mills there. I believe, this is a guess, that the new administration will be more sympathetic to for-profits. There was a sense in the past administration that profit was evil. Maybe I'm just over-interpreting, but I think that the administration will be more favorable towards for-profit schools. Yes, sir. Another question.
Bill, we spoke briefly before your presentation about, and you talked optimistically about the forecast for Oregon. But there is a ballot at the moment in Oregon about the potential of an equivalent B&O tax coming.
Right.
How do you think that could affect Oregon going forward?
Yeah, so the question is about a tax in Oregon equivalent to Washington's B&O tax. It would be a tax on gross receipts. And we have a challenge in the Oregon budget right now, and the challenge is that the legislature and the governor made a lot of plans, and some of them are 20 years old regarding public pensions, and we don't have the money to maintain those plans. The old stuff is the pensions. The new stuff was the expansion of Medicaid just a couple of years ago. And even though the economy's been growing rapidly, we don't have the funds to maintain those plans. So there is a proposal for a corporate tax. They're calling it a corporate tax. It is actually a sales tax that will be passed on to consumers and to fund pension costs and Medicaid costs. Whether it'll pass it smells to me like something is going to happen there. But certainly, if a tax bill is passed by the legislature, it'll come back to the people through an initiative objection. And the people don't like sales taxes or things like that smell like sales taxes. So the big picture future of Oregon's finances, it's a mess. And I don't see an easy resolution of it. We're going to take one last question. But before that last question, we have a door prize. It's a blazer basket with a basketball, a sign, and some other stuff. And let me pick from one of the business cards here. We have, all right, that will go to Deanne Wheaton. Congratulations, Deanne. Deanne's a student at Portland State University. One last question, then I have to tell you about lunch. Yeah.
You
Tom?
mentioned you predicted 30-year mortgages going up.
Right.
Anything to do? What about the stock market? What are you looking at there?
So the question is, what about the stock market? All right. My forecast of the stock market should be used for entertainment purposes only and not for investments. I think that the stock market is pretty high. And I look at the charts, I'm like, the stock market, and then I look at my own economic forecast. Now, my forecast is more pessimistic than Wall Street. Maybe that's the problem. And I don't personally, I do not try to time the stock market, go in and out, but it sure seems high. Now, in the past, when the stock market is high, when it's too high, it resolves itself in a couple of different ways. One possible path is it just levels off and waits until the economy grows to fit that level of stock market. The other path is less pleasant, and you know what that looks like. But I'm a little bit nervous about the height of the stock market. Well, I said I was going to tell you about lunch, and I am going to tell you about lunch. Let me just mention, I'm going to be hanging around after this presentation, and I'd be happy to take personally the questions you're embarrassed to ask in public. And you're also welcome to email me a question. And those of you watching through the live feed, feel free to send me an email. Just mention you're at this presentation, at this Wells Fargo hosted presentation, so I can separate your email from the groupies and stalkers who so bedevil handsome young economists. But let me tell you about lunch. 1988. I met a very talented entrepreneur. He had started with nothing, built up a business, had a couple of locations, very profitable, really good at understanding his clients' challenges and meeting their needs. He had a vision of doubling the size of his business, but he took me to lunch because he had read an awful book. He didn't know it was an awful book, but the book was entitled The Great Depression of 1990. And again, lunch in 1988, and the book, The Great Depression of 1990, predicted a 7-year depression worse than the 1930s. The book said, companies are going to go bankrupt left and right. Households will go bankrupt left and right. There will be bank failures because of bad loans. So many bank failures, the author wrote, that the FDIC will not be able to honor deposit insurance. So go to your bank, withdraw cash, and either stuff it in a mattress or bury it in a backyard. I spent all lunch trying to explain economic history, the theory behind this goofball book's notions. I tried to talk him out of believing this nonsense, but I failed. He chose not to expand. And I'm reminded of it because a couple of times a year I drive past his original location. It's still there, and I'm like, oh, wow. The business expanded, the market for his goods and services quadrupled. He got none of the growth. Other businesses saw the void. They moved in. This guy left millions of dollars on the table because he bet against America. Friends, the American economy is resilient. The American people are resilient. The American nation is resilient. And that is your economic outlook. Thank you.